Rain struck the roof of the warehouse like shrapnel from a forgotten war. Captain America stood just inside the rusted entrance, his shield slung across his back, boots soaked, eyes locked on the scene ahead. A single overhead bulb swung from a chain, casting long, flickering shadows across the floor. In the center lay a body, cold, twisted, and brutally torn apart. The scent of burnt wires, gun oil, and something off hung heavy in the air. Steve Rogers didn't flinch. He'd seen death before. Too much of it. But this was different. This was personal. No cameras, no guards, no struggle marks. Just blood smeared across reinforced concrete and a single fingerprint scorched into steel, burned so deep it warped the metal. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. And they weren't just trying to kill. They were trying to send a message. The only sound inside was the creaking chain above and the slow, steady breath Steve forced himself to take. "We need a scent reader," he muttered, mostly to himself. From behind, the sliding door groaned open. "You rang, Cap?" Her voice cut through the silence like a knife through silk, low, sardonic, and laced with hangover. Jessica Jones stepped into the light, long coat dripping with rain, boots leaving muddy prints behind her. Her hair was a tangled mess, sunglasses still on despite the storm outside. She looked like she'd walked out of a bar fight and decided to keep the attitude. "You're late," Steve said, eyes narrowing slightly. Jessica took off her shades, revealing bloodshot eyes that still saw everything. "You're lucky I showed up at all," she replied, pulling a flask from her coat. She took a swig, grimaced, then crouched beside the body. "What are we looking for?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air said enough. Jessica sniffed once, then again, her brow furrowed. "That's not right." Steve stepped closer. "What?" She stood, slowly, eyes sharper now. The alcohol faded behind instinct. "There's more than blood in here. Fear, rage. But there's something. Synthetic. Familiar. Whatever they used to kill this guy, it wasn't human." Steve's jaw clenched. "Hydra." Jessica tilted her head, scenting again like a hound tracking through fog. "No," she said. "Something worse. Something personal." Her gaze drifted to him, and something in her tone shifted. "They wanted you to find this." For a beat, neither spoke. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the shattered remains of a weapon lying in the corner. Steve recognized it instantly, a prototype only 3 people on Earth had access to. One of them was dead. Another had vanished. The third was Steve himself. Jessica looked at him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You didn't tell me everything, did you?" Steve's silence said more than words ever could. Jessica stepped back, her face unreadable now. The scent told her what he wouldn't. Regret. Grief. Guilt layered like smoke. "You hired me to solve a crime," she said, slipping her flask back into her coat. "But this smells like a trap." And without waiting for permission, she walked deeper into the dark, her nose leading the way through secrets even Captain America hadn't dared to face. Behind her, Steve followed, not as a leader, but as a man caught in something far bigger than he was ready to admit. The streets of New York never slept. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle, tapping on rooftops and windows like the city was trying to whisper its secrets. Jessica Jones walked ahead, her boots splashing in the puddles, the steady rhythm of her footsteps somehow louder than the world around her. Steve Rogers, trailing a few steps behind, kept his eyes on her, sharp but distant. The air between them was thick with things left unsaid. "How much further?" Steve asked, breaking the silence. Jessica didn't slow down. "Depends on what you're looking for." Her voice was cool, too cool for someone who'd just stepped out of a crime scene like that. She didn't flinch when a car honked its horn as it swerved past, splashing water on the curb. She was used to the chaos. Steve's hand tightened around his shield strap. He was used to chaos too, but not like this. not with her. The last time he'd been this close to someone, truly close, was a lifetime ago. He had to keep it together, had to stay focused on the mission, but every time he caught a glimpse of her, the knots in his chest tightened. "You should have taken the night off," Steve added, the words feeling heavier than he intended. "I don't do off." She smirked over her shoulder, her eyes glinting behind the mess of dark hair that framed her face. "And I'm not your damn sidekick, Cap. You want answers, you got me. No guarantees." That was the thing about Jessica Jones. She wasn't easy. She didn't offer hope or comfort. She offered truth. Raw, unfiltered truth. And sometimes, the truth was harder to deal with than any villain they could face. They rounded the corner, and Jessica's nose twitched as she inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a second. Steve saw it, a brief flicker of recognition, of something only she could understand. "What is it?" he asked, taking a step closer, but keeping a careful distance. He'd learned long ago not to crowd someone like Jessica, especially when she was on the edge of something she couldn't explain. Jessica's eyes snapped open, and she stared at the building in front of them. It was an old brownstone, windows dark, no sign of movement inside. But Jessica's senses weren't fooled. She could smell it, the same bitter scent from the warehouse, faint but unmistakable. Whoever did this, they're close, real close. Steve's stomach dropped. "How can you be sure?" "Because I can smell their fear," Jessica said, her voice harder than before. "It's all over this place, like they've been here, and they're still here." Steve's eyes narrowed. He scanned the dark windows, the alley beside the building, the fire escape climbing up to the rooftop. It felt like they were being watched. "Then let's go," he said, his tone hardening with purpose. Jessica didn't wait for him. She was already moving toward the door, her hand sliding into her coat pocket, ready for whatever came next. Steve stayed close, but not too close. They both knew what could happen in an instant. Inside the building, the air was colder. The smell of stale cigarettes and old furniture mixed with that same lingering scent, the one that gnawed at the back of Steve's mind, unsettling and familiar. Jessica paused in the middle of the room. She turned slowly, taking in the surroundings, sniffing the air like a predator. Steve waited, every muscle tense, but his eyes never left her. She could almost sense it, the way his gaze lingered on her, the way his presence made her skin prickle with something she wasn't willing to acknowledge. Then she found it, a faint scent of smoke mixed with something sweeter, almost floral. The source was close, too close. "Get down," Jessica shouted, and before Steve could react, she grabbed his arm and yanked him to the floor. A shot rang out, splintering the wooden beams above them. The force of the bullet passed through the air like a whisper from death itself. Steve's shield was in his hand before the echo had died. Jessica pushed herself up and swore under her breath, her hand already on the gun at her waist. "Told you it wasn't going to be easy." But Steve didn't speak. He was already moving. The mission wasn't over. Not yet. And neither was the war between them. The shot had come so fast, so close, Jessica didn't have time to register it. But she wasn't surprised. She'd been in enough situations where death was just a breath away to know how to react. Her instincts were sharp, kept sharp by years of doing what Steve Rogers did without the shiny uniform and $1 million budget. The bullet had grazed the wood above them, splintering it into fragments that scattered across the floor. Jessica pushed herself up, shaking off the dust and debris. She felt the weight of Steve's hand on her arm, pulling her back, but she shrugged it off. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a low growl, tension tight in his words. Jessica smirked, brushing off the remnants of wood splinters from her jacket. "Yeah, I've had worse." Her eyes flicked toward the dark corner of the room where the shot had come from. There was a figure in the shadows, just barely visible. A silhouette, tall, hunched, like someone waiting to strike. They weren't alone. More movement flickered in the dark. Jessica could smell the sweat, the fear, and beneath it all, the unmistakable scent of something synthetic. Hydra. She glanced at Steve, whose shield was now firmly in hand. The tension between them was palpable, like two forces drawn to each other, too powerful to ignore. And for a second, just a fleeting moment, it hit Jessica, the intensity of the pull she felt when she was close to him. But she pushed it down, deep into the pit of her stomach, where it couldn't interfere. Not now. Steve's eyes locked with hers, a silent understanding passing between them. He moved, fast, and she followed suit. No words needed. They didn't need to plan. Their bodies already knew the rhythm of this dangerous dance. The figure in the shadows stepped forward, a man, tall and unbothered by the tension in the room. He had a scar across his cheek, the kind that marked someone who had been through battles and came out on the other side colder. "Didn't think I'd get company," the man said, his voice rough, but there was an unmistakable arrogance in it. "You've been busy," Steve replied, his voice low but commanding. "We need answers." The man chuckled, a cruel laugh that echoed off the walls. "Answers? Oh, I think you've been asking the wrong questions. You should be asking who you are, or better yet, who you've been." Jessica narrowed her eyes, sensing the trap before it was even set. The man knew something. Something Steve didn't. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward, her hand resting lightly on the gun holstered at her side. The scent of the man was now mixed with something darker, more dangerous, a pheromone soaked in madness and malice. The man stepped into the dim light. His eyes were empty, as if hollowed out by something long ago. "I'm the one who's been pulling your strings," he said, looking straight at Steve. "And you've been following them without even knowing." Steve's jaw clenched, and his shield shifted slightly, a warning to anyone who would come too close. Before he could respond, the sound of a door slamming open echoed behind them. A group of masked men, Hydra agents, no doubt, flooded into the room, guns raised, eyes hidden beneath their black masks. The room erupted in chaos. Jessica dove to the side, rolling and springing back up with a fluid motion, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and fear. She could hear Steve's shield slicing through the air, knocking out the first wave of attackers. But there were too many. "Get out of here," Steve shouted, his voice rising over the noise. Jessica grinned, pulling out a small metal blade she carried in her boot. "Not my style, Cap. I fight until it's done." And she leaped into the fray, a whirlwind of strength and fury, feeling the heat of battle coursing through her veins. Each punch she landed was more than just physical. It was a release, a reminder that no matter how much she tried to stay detached, there was something inside her that thrived on the chaos, on the danger. And despite everything, despite the bloodshed and the lies, she wasn't ready to walk away yet. Not from this fight. Not from him. The battle had raged for what felt like hours, though the night outside hadn't moved an inch. The masked Hydra agents had proven relentless, flooding the room with force until the space was thick with tension and the smell of smoke. Steve's shield had become a blur of motion, knocking men down with each calculated throw, while Jessica's fists tore through the air, breaking bones and promises alike. But now, silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of Jessica's heavy breaths as she stood in the middle of the chaos. The Hydra agents were subdued, scattered across the floor, either unconscious or groaning in defeat. Her hands were stained, her knuckles bruised, but it was the adrenaline that kept her moving. Steve had already begun securing the perimeter, his sharp gaze scanning for any sign of danger. His jaw was tight, his movements precise, but there was a heaviness to his stance now, a weight that wasn't just from the fight. "Not bad," Jessica muttered, wiping the sweat from her brow, her tone equal parts sarcasm and satisfaction. Steve didn't respond right away. He was looking at her, studying her as if something deep within him was trying to make sense of it all. His eyes were weary, like someone who'd seen the world break too many times, but there was something softer there too, something hidden just below the surface. You know, she said, tossing a Hydra agent's weapon aside and walking toward him, I didn't sign up for the emotional baggage. I'm just here to get paid. Steve didn't smile. He wasn't in the mood for jokes. You could have stayed out of this. It wasn't your fight. Jessica's eyes narrowed. You think I don't know that? I didn't sign up for this kind of mess, but you dragged me into it. Her voice wasn't as sharp as it usually was, though. There was something else, something raw there. And Steve could feel it tugging at him. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, I guess I did. There was a pause, and then his voice softened, just enough for her to hear it. I didn't mean for you to get caught in the crossfire. Jessica stared at him, her face unreadable. She had always been good at hiding what was beneath the surface. Too good, in fact. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, trying to shake the sudden vulnerability that threatened to rise up in her chest. You don't owe me anything, Hap, she said flatly, her voice cutting through the moment like a knife. I've got my own problems, my own ghosts to deal with. I'm not here to save the day. But Steve's gaze never wavered. No one's asking you to save anything. His voice was firm, but there was something underneath it, a layer of unspoken understanding, an echo of a truth that neither of them had fully accepted yet. Jessica clenched her jaw and turned her back on him, but not before she caught a glimpse of his face. The look in his eyes was too much, too vulnerable, too intense. She could feel the pull again, like a magnet too strong to resist, but she pushed it down. Then why the hell did you hire me, Rogers? She shot over her shoulder, her voice sharper now, but her heart wasn't in it. Because I needed someone who understands the mess, Steve said, his tone quieter now, as though he knew exactly what she was trying to avoid. Someone who isn't afraid to face it, someone who doesn't run. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the world around them fell away. It was just the two of them, standing in the ruins of a broken fight, their shared history hanging between them like an invisible weight. And for the first time in a long time, Jessica realized something she hadn't been ready to admit. She didn't want to run anymore. Not from him. Not from this. The silence stretched, both of them caught in the same unspoken truth. But Jessica was the first to break it. She reached for her flask and took a long swig, her hand trembling just slightly. You're lucky I'm still here, she muttered, her voice low, thick with something she couldn't quite name. Steve didn't say anything. He just watched her, and in that moment, he knew that this was only the beginning. The beginning of something dangerous, something neither of them were ready for. The city had fallen quiet, but Jessica knew better than to trust the stillness. The streets of New York had a way of whispering danger, and tonight, the air felt thick with it, like the calm before a storm. Steve stood beside her, his back to the cracked window of the abandoned warehouse they'd taken refuge in. The moonlight filtered through the glass, casting pale beams across the room. His shield was resting against the wall, his fingers tapping against it absently. His eyes were distant, but Jessica could feel the weight of his thoughts, even without him saying a word. You thinking about what he said? She asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter than usual, the sharpness softened by something unspoken. Steve's gaze flickered over to her, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out at the night, as though waiting for something in the darkness to come for him. I'm thinking about a lot of things, he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of regret. But nothing makes sense. Jessica leaned against the table, crossing her arms, her sharp eyes trained on him. Of course, it doesn't. The moment you start to make sense of things like this, it means you're too far gone. She paused, then added, I've been there. Trust me. Steve's jaw tightened at her words, but he didn't deny them. Instead, he pushed himself off the wall and walked toward her. He wasn't angry, just determined, like a man on the edge of something he wasn't ready to face. I hired you because I need answers, he said, his voice firm. And right now, everything points to one thing. He stepped closer, the tension between them rising again like a storm building on the horizon. Hydra, Jessica muttered under her breath, uncrossing her arms and shifting on her feet. Her superhuman sense of smell had picked up traces of the scent again, buried beneath layers of gunpowder and sweat. It was a faint odor, like metal mixed with something cold, too precise to be anything but Hydra. That's why this feels personal. Whoever's behind this, they know exactly what buttons to push. Steve didn't look away. I think they're after something more than just me, he said. But I don't know what. Not yet, Jessica agreed, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Something had shifted in the room, the kind of shift that came right before a storm. She could smell it. The air had changed. There was more than just the stink of Hydra in the room now. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and Jessica's senses went on high alert. Steve's hand immediately gripped the handle of his shield, ready for whatever came next. The figure in the doorway was tall, clad in dark, weathered armor, with eyes that gleamed like polished glass. He stepped into the room slowly, deliberately. He wasn't alone. Behind him, two more figures emerged, silent and deadly, their faces hidden beneath black hoods and masks. They moved like shadows, as if the very darkness had swallowed them whole. Steve's heart skipped a beat, his grip tightening on his shield. I knew it. Jessica didn't hesitate. Her body tensed as she stepped between Steve and the strangers. "You're looking for something," she said, her voice hard. "And I'm not about to let you take it." The man in the doorway tilted his head, his voice smooth and menacing. "We're not here to take anything from you, Miss Jones. We're here to remind Captain America of something he's forgotten. Something that's been buried for far too long." The air in the room seemed to freeze, the words hanging between them like a curse. Steve's eyes darkened, a flicker of something older, something painful, crossing his face. "Tell me what you want," Steve said, his voice low, dangerous. His body was coiled, ready to strike, "and I'll give you one chance to walk away." The man stepped forward, a cruel smile on his lips. "One chance, Captain. You don't get to make those decisions anymore. We're here to finish what you started." Jessica's stomach tightened as the man's words sank in. She could feel the darkness closing in around them. This wasn't just about Hydra. This wasn't just about a mission gone wrong. This was about something personal, something that tied them all together. And the truth they were about to uncover, it was darker than either of them could have imagined. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy, like a predator waiting to strike. The figure in the doorway didn't move, his eyes locked on Steve, each second a tense promise of what was to come. Jessica's muscles were coiled tight, her senses screaming that this was the moment where everything changed. "You don't have the luxury of time, Rogers," the man said, his voice smooth, cold like the steel in his hands. His dark armor gleamed faintly under the dim light, an unsettling reflection of the brutality it represented. Steve didn't flinch, though his jaw was set tight, and there was an edge to his stance. He knew these kinds of games, knew what it felt like to be the target of Hydra's obsession. But the man in front of him, this wasn't just another faceless soldier. This was something personal. "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but you're wrong," Steve said, his voice low, carrying the weight of years spent fighting these shadows. "If you're looking for a fight, you've got it. But I'm not letting you touch anyone here." The man smiled, a twisted thing, full of malice and something worse. "I'm not interested in fighting, Captain. I'm here for the truth. You see, the past has a way of coming back, sometimes with a vengeance." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" The man stepped forward, his movements deliberate, calculated. "You've both forgotten," he continued, ignoring her question. "Hydra has been with you longer than you realize. You didn't just fight them. You were them." The words struck like a lightning bolt, a jolt of something cold running through Jessica's veins. She could feel the change in Steve's posture, the subtle shift in his stance that betrayed something darker, deeper. She could hear his breath catch, just for a second, as though the truth had slammed into him harder than any shield ever could. "Don't listen to him," Jessica warned, stepping between them, her instincts kicking in. Her heightened senses could feel the shift in the air. This was more than a fight. This was a game with stakes that neither of them had fully understood. Steve's eyes never left the man in front of him, though his mind raced, piecing together the fragments of truth he'd long buried. "What are you talking about? I've never been a part of Hydra. I was frozen." The man laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "Frozen? No. You were more than a soldier. You were part of something much bigger. Something that's been waiting for you. Waiting for Hydra's perfect weapon to return." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Her senses picked up a new layer of the man's scent, an undercurrent of something too familiar, something she couldn't place. "You're lying," she growled, taking a step forward. But even as she said the words, a part of her wasn't so sure. The man's eyes glinted. "Ask yourself, Captain, why do they call you Captain America, and not by your real name? They erased you for a reason. You think you're fighting Hydra. You've been playing their game this whole time." Steve's expression hardened, his breath coming faster. He was trying to hold on to something, some part of his past that made sense, that kept him tethered to the world he'd fought to protect. But this was different. The air between them had changed, had thickened into something that felt like a storm, something that threatened to tear apart everything he'd known. "You're wrong," Steve muttered, though the doubt in his voice betrayed him. "I know who I am." The man took another step forward, the shadows around him swallowing the light. "Do you, Steve Rogers? Do you really?" Jessica's stomach twisted, her superhuman senses catching the lingering scent of something that tasted like betrayal. She didn't know how, didn't understand why, but something inside her screamed that this wasn't just about Hydra. It wasn't even just about Steve. This was about them. A faint tremor ran through Jessica, but she didn't show it. She stepped forward, forcing herself between Steve and the man. "You're not taking him anywhere." The man raised a hand, as if to dismiss her completely. "This isn't your fight, Jessica," he said, the words heavy with finality. "But it will be, soon enough." With that, he turned, the shadows closing in on him like a cloak. His parting words hung in the air, a chilling promise. "We'll see you soon." As the darkness consumed him, Jessica felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. The truth was coming, and it wasn't going to be pretty. And when it finally hit, it would change everything. For both of them. The warehouse had fallen into a chilling silence. The shadows still lingered in the corners, but the man was gone, swallowed by the darkness he had brought with him. For a moment, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Jessica's mind raced, the words echoing in her head. "You were part of something bigger." Her gaze flicked to Steve, whose face was pale, his expression hardened with something between disbelief and fury. "Is it true?" she asked softly, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. There was no hiding the concern in her tone. Despite the edge of defiance, she wore like a second skin. She knew better than to let herself care too much, to allow herself to be pulled into this, but the shadows in Steve's eyes weren't something she could ignore. Steve didn't answer immediately. He stood still, his chest rising and falling with each breath, as if the weight of the man's words had physically struck him. His hands were clenched at his sides, his fingers twitching with the urge to move, to act. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low and raw. "I don't know if it's true. But it feels like I've been living a lie." The vulnerability in his voice cut through the tension like a blade, and Jessica felt a pang of something she couldn't quite place. Compassion, regret, or maybe it was just the simple truth that she didn't want to watch someone else unravel in front of her. "You've spent so long fighting Hydra," she said, stepping closer, "that maybe you've started believing they define who you are. But they don't. You're not their puppet, Cap." The use of his nickname made Steve flinch slightly, but he didn't look away. His gaze was distant, caught somewhere between the present and the past, a battlefield in his mind where his identity was being torn apart. I was frozen for decades, Steve murmured, almost as if talking to himself. I fought to protect the world, to stand for something. But what if they were right? What if I am just another weapon they created, designed to play their game? Jessica's heart sank as she watched the turmoil play out on his face. She'd seen soldiers break before, people who had given everything only to have the very foundations of their lives crumble beneath them. But this was different. This wasn't just doubt. This was an identity in crisis. I can't be the man they want me to be, Steve said, his voice tightening with frustration. I can't be Hydra's creation. Jessica's eyes softened, but she wasn't sure how to fix this. She wasn't even sure it could be fixed. Her life had been a series of broken promises, of lost chances. She wasn't someone who could save a man who didn't even know who he was anymore. But that didn't stop her from trying. You're not them, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the heavy air. You're Steve Rogers. You fought to protect this country, this world, because it was your choice. You've never been anyone's puppet, and you're sure as hell not anyone's weapon. Steve's eyes met hers, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or disbelief, passing through him. For a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist, like it was just the two of them, suspended in time, caught in this shared moment of uncertainty. But Jessica knew better than to linger in it. She stepped back, the weight of the moment still pulling at her chest. We need to figure out what's going on, she said, her voice hardening again, back to the tough exterior she wore like armor. And we need to do it fast. Whoever that guy was, whoever he's working for, they're not done with you. They're not done with either of us. Steve didn't argue. He nodded, pushing aside the remnants of doubt and fear, the burden of uncertainty settling into the back of his mind. He had a job to do. He had a world to protect. But as he turned to gather his things, Jessica caught a glimpse of his face. The battle inside him was far from over. She could see it, the weight of everything he had been told, everything he had fought for, was pressing down on him. And the worst part, he wasn't sure he could trust himself anymore. The truth wasn't just an enemy lurking in the shadows. It was something far more dangerous. It was the very foundation of everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed. And in that moment, Jessica knew. The man standing next to her wasn't just Captain America. He was a soldier caught in the crossfire of his own past, and no matter how hard he fought, the echoes of that past would follow him forever. Let's finish this, Steve said, his voice steady again, though the cracks in it were still there, faint but present. Jessica nodded, feeling the weight of it all settle into her bones. This wasn't just a fight for the world. It was a fight for their own redemption, for the chance to reclaim what had been lost. And it wasn't going to be easy. The city was alive with the hum of night, but to Steve and Jessica, it felt like the calm before a storm. They stood together on the rooftop, the winds whipping around them as they stared at the distant skyline. Every light, every shadow, felt like a reminder that the truth they were searching for was just out of reach. Jessica wiped the blood from her knuckles, still raw from their last encounter. But it didn't matter. She was used to pain. The hard part, the part that gnawed at her insides, was what she couldn't fix, what neither of them could. We're running out of time, she muttered, her voice hoarse from the constant tension that had been tightening in her chest. Whoever those people are, they're coming for us, and they don't care who gets in their way. Steve didn't respond right away. His hands were steady, but his expression was far from it. His brow furrowed, like he was battling something internal that didn't have a clear answer. He had come to terms with a lot in his life, but this, the pieces of himself that he couldn't put together, the lies wrapped in truth, was something else entirely. I thought I was done with this, Steve finally said, his voice rough. Done with being their weapon, but every time I take a step forward, it feels like I'm walking back into their trap. Jessica turned to face him, her eyes sharp, but her gaze softened when she saw the weight on his face. She had always seen the Captain America that everyone else admired. The perfect soldier, the hero of 1,000 battles. But this man, standing beside her, was a broken version of that. He was still Captain America, yes, but the truth that had been buried in the deepest part of him was slowly unraveling, piece by piece. "You're not their weapon anymore," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And you never were. You fought because you chose to, not because they told you to." Steve's eyes met hers, searching for something in her expression, something that could anchor him in the storm that raged inside. What if that's all I am? What if they made me to be nothing but a tool for their war? Jessica took a step closer, her gaze intense. "Then you'd be like everyone else. But you're not. You've spent your life fighting for something better. You're not a puppet. You're you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The winds blew colder now, a stark contrast to the warmth of their words. But Jessica's heart didn't race as it once had. It was still, locked in place by the man in front of her, the man who had been everything she wasn't, hopeful, pure, unyielding. And yet, even he was breaking. "Hydra was never finished with me," Steve said softly. "And it's clear they're not done with you either." Jessica's sharp senses caught something she didn't like, the faintest hint of movement from the corner of the rooftop. Her instincts screamed at her to act, but Steve was already on it, his shield in hand and his body bracing for the inevitable. Two figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with purpose, their eyes locked on Steve as they drew closer. One of them, a woman in black armor, smiled coldly. "Running away again, Rogers," she sneered. "You should know by now. There's no escaping your past." Jessica's fists clenched, her mind racing. These were the people who had been hunting Steve, hunting them both, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "I'm done with running," Steve said, his voice a low growl. He took a step forward, his shield raised, ready to face whatever came next. Jessica's eyes flicked to the woman in black, her nostrils flaring as she analyzed the air. "You're not getting what you came for," she warned, her voice low, sharp. The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Jessica to see. There was something off about this fight, something deeper than just physical. "We've already won, Captain," the woman said, her voice suddenly softer, colder. "You're not the hero you think you are. You never were." With a movement too quick for the human eye to follow, the woman lunged forward, but Jessica was faster. She stepped in front of Steve, her body a shield of its own as she slammed into the woman, knocking her off course. The world around them seemed to freeze, just for a second. Then the storm broke. The fight was on. But as the battle unfolded, Jessica could sense it. Something was about to break, something in Steve, something in the very core of their mission. The truth was closing in, and they weren't ready for what they'd find when it finally shattered everything they had fought for. The answers they had been seeking were no longer just a matter of survival. They were a matter of identity. And in the end, they would have to face the truth, whether they were ready for it or not.